Hello and welcome to Movie Night. It's obviously been a while since our last upload, as I think we say pretty much every time. But I'm Albert, and I'm joined here by Ed. And we're today
Hello.
going to talk about hello. We're today going to talk about a film that we both saw together, both saw at the cinema, which is something it feels like has been forever since we've been
Mm.
before. um, but we both saw the film Akira, or however you
Akira.
Akira, yeah, however
You want to be a dickhead about
the
it.
best for me, yeah, the best pronunciation of it is. But Akira is a film from 1988. It's a
Mm.
Japanese film, Japanese animated film, uh, and I can read this little synopsis for you. I've got here. It says, a secret military project endangers Neo Tokyo when it turns out a biker gang member turns into a rampaging psychic psychopath who can only be stopped by two teenagers and a group of psychics. So I think that
Mm.
pretty much sums it up nicely. So, Ed, what did you make of Akira? Now, obviously, I know that before you saw it, you'd seen it
Mm.
before, whereas I had never seen it before we saw it in the cinema. So,
Yeah, well, I think that's worth touching on. First of all, I'll say I had seen it as a dumb kid.
yeah,
I'd seen it like probably about 8 times. Rented it like, and obviously didn't really understand it fully. So this is pretty much my first time watching it uh, properly. I think it's amazing. It's definitely like my kind of film. It almost feels like it was, in a way, it feels like it was almost made for me. Like I love the aesthetic of it. This the uh, grungy sci-fi dystopian almost. But I'm actually more curious to start off with what you think, because for a bit of context, well, not only have we not done an anime review on movie night before, but Albert here hasn't really seen any anime at all. So I kind of threw him in on the deep end on this one. Uh, so my first question is, yeah, what did you think as someone who has never seen really an anime film before?
yeah. As you say, I've never seen an anime before, but what I do love in a similar way to you is I love that kind of sci-fi dystopian thing like that. A
Mm.
lot of films I love, like Blade Runner,
Mm.
stuff like that, like kind of 80s sci-fi. And so for me, that fits really well in well with that. And I really enjoyed it as well. I think the aesthetic is really interesting. The amount of sheer work that must have gone into creating these like amazing
Oh
visual
God.
things is just really staggering. And to see it in the cinema as well was really great,
Mm.
because the sound system we saw it in was good, and the big screen, it was really worth seeing it on there. So for that, yeah, I did really enjoy it, and it would, I'd be interested to see some more at some point, like of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Certainly, yeah.
Do you think tonally and narratively, like it's a big departure from like Western-y stuff, or do you think that it's kind of what you expected, sort of going in?
Um, yeah, it's kind of its own. It's almost like its own like type of film, almost like its own genre
Yeah.
in the way that it's like. I mean, it's not like impossible to follow. Like it still follows
Mm.
a story structure. So like it is still, I think it's still accessible to
Mm.
like general audiences. I think it's the kind of film that like if you were watching it at home and you watched the first like half an hour or something and you just absolutely hated it, like
Mm.
I wouldn't, like it's probably not worth watching the rest of it, like
Yeah,
in
yeah.
that sense. But if you're just happy just to sort of like immerse yourself in the kind of in the world that's being shown, like,
Mm.
and there's still a lot to connect with, I think, with like on a character level and stuff like that. I think it would be
Yeah.
generally accessible for anyone.
I think it's interesting because this is obviously like a kind of an anime classic, like not
Mm,
to be too hyperbolic, but it was sort of like genre defining, if you will.
yeah,
Uh, and it was sort of in that I'm going to show my nerd in this episode, but like it was sort of in that good age of anime where like there wasn't many tropes yet. It was just sort of like everyone was making their own weird thing,
yeah,
which is kind of why there wasn't any, I think people have a few like preconceptions with anime and like of like cliches and stuff. uh, which is definitely like not unfounded.
Yeah,
In fact, there are a few in this one, but I think that this film was really great because it's like, I don't know, it really does feel like its own thing. It feels distinctly like Japanese, which I'll
yeah,
talk about a
yeah.
bit later, but it doesn't feel, I don't know, pandery. I don't know, like it feels
I
like
think
very.
it's the thing between being like a good anime or just a good film in general. Like
Oh yeah,
just to me, just like would happily like it's just a good, enjoyable, watchable film. You know, like it's as
yeah.
well as being a good animated film.
hmm I was going to ask as well, like we were actually talking about this before we saw, but there are certain films like this that have just been like talked about quite a lot. And again, I use the word genre defining. When you know stuff like that about the film before you see it, sometimes that can sort of skew your perception of it. But do you think that it was like overhyped for you? Do you think it lived up to its sort of reputation?
Well, honestly, I had only really I hadn't really heard that much about it. Like in terms of like I hadn't heard anything about the story really, other than like a
Mm,
very basic plot out, like oh you know like
yeah,
or something. But like so I didn't have any sort of expectation, and because I think just because I hadn't seen any anime at all, I was just kind of like you know let's see what
yeah.
it's like really. So
Mm,
I guess
that's
because
good.
I didn't really have any expectations, so I could there wasn't really any like
Well,
nothing.
that's ideal.
Yeah, yeah. So I was just kind of like, oh, let's see what this is like. I just hope I enjoy it. And so
Mm,
yes, in that case, it did exceed it because I did enjoy it. So,
yeah, that's good then.
but I know what you mean
No,
with that whole like when something is so built up like that, you know, there's
mm,
yeah, then you get there and it's just like, oh, is that it?
yeah,
I didn't feel like that at all. No.
yeah. I mean, it's definitely not a perfect film. I have a few things that I'll mention later, but like, uh, you can see. I mean, just from watching films like Blade Runner, and stuff like that, The Matrix as well. Just the whole aesthetic was very inspiring on like Westerners as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know it had a major impact on the Matrix,
mm,
particularly. Yeah, I think Blade Runner was actually released before this actually.
it was actually, yeah, I just
But
remembered
yeah, yeah,
that.
but certainly, I know it did. Yeah, the Matrix and the kind of action sequences within that, you can really see that.
mm,
And the Matrix itself was a really influential film as well. So that whole,
yeah.
you know, it's a whole knock-on effect of influencing all kinds of stuff.
It does make me kind of sad in a way because I feel like sci-fi nowadays is very, it tries to look as pretty as possible, like almost like an idealistic future. I like stuff like this that takes a look at like, okay, well, realistically everything's gonna kind of go to shit. Like there's gonna be poverty still, hooligans, biker gangs in this case, like uh, the idea that there's going to be some utopian future where everyone's like doesn't go hungry or and has these nice pretty skylines is kind of a bit too optimistic. So I like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I think a good example of that kind of thing is, yeah, I don't know if have you seen Ready Player One?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a lot like that in that it kind of sets up the whole dystopian thing, but then it's kind of like
Mm.
we're not really interested in that, you know. Like it's more
Well,
like
it
you know,
probably
it's more just
yeah.
about like oh, doesn't this look cool kind of thing. Um,
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not so much the tone because I guess the tone of stuff like that is
yeah,
similar to this, but it's like it's the aesthetic of it because like there's clearly like technological advances, but at the same time, a
yeah,
lot of the problems that are still in society today are still like
and
in the
I
future,
think
if that makes sense.
I think the whole using like more CGI than the 2D animation makes it not as charming. Like I think
Yes.
the fact that this is 2D anime, it makes it look you know it gives it that timeless quality that a lot of some other films don't have.
Yeah. So a bit of a nerd fact, if you want.
Mm.
So if you don't know, 2D animation, the way, especially back in the day, nowadays it's normally done digitally, although you still have to draw every frame. Back in the day, films like this were made literally by drawing every frame by hand and taking a picture of it, and then like playing it obviously
Yeah, yeah,
back in speed. And most uh, old anime or animated films like that. Disney's, for example, they have about 12 drawings a second maximum, which is still quite a lot, obviously.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but there are parts in Akira that have the most. I think over half of it is 12 drawings a second, but there are parts that are like 24
Yeah,
drawings a second, and that's when you get the really, really smooth, like it's insane to look at to this day.
yeah,
And you're really right, like it makes it age so much better because
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
Mhm. The part where the guy falls off the motorbike at the beginning and he's just tumbling, like
Yeah,
spit. It's just
yeah,
yeah, it's great.
absolutely, yeah, and any no, I mean it's not always the case. I think like that 2D will always age better than 3D because there's plenty of bad 2D animations that are
Oh,
probably
for sure,
rubbish.
yeah,
But like it's the general if you when you're directly comparing like one thing to
mm,
another, like comparing
yeah,
2D Lion King to 3D Lion King as we have before on this channel,
yeah,
like it's so easy to see why one works and why one doesn't.
yeah, exactly. I think it's the fact that there's like a style to it.
Yeah.
When there's a strong sense of style, uh, that can persist
Yeah, absolutely.
throughout time. Whereas if you just sort of base the visuals off exactly like real life,
Mm.
that usually tends to age a bit worse.
Yeah, well, like
Um,
Into the Spider-Verse is a good example of, although that is like 3D animated, it has such a strong sense of the style that it wants to have that I bet that'll look great in like 20 years, however long. I'm sure that'll
Absolutely,
look
yeah,
really good.
yeah, and also like it obviously makes sense to use like one technology
Mm.
to its fullest potential, but you got to think like if you're just kind of using it to show off, then
Mm.
it's not going to age well because uh, you know it's you're going to get some new technology eventually, and it's going to look the old one
Yeah,
look
well, yeah.
ridiculous.
Although if I complain about CGI, it's not just the use of it because the best use of
Yeah.
CGI, you hardly notice it's there. Like,
Hmm.
and they've been doing that for years. You just look at like in Lord of the Rings, the effects to make some of them look, making them look smaller than the others. Like that's
Yeah.
great, even though that was like 20 years ago. Um,
Mm.
but I mean,
Uh,
that's a slight tangent. I'm talking about Akira, but
no, it's all right.
it's still
I was going to mention Girl with the Dragon Tattoo as well. A lot of the CGI was used to like make stuff look more normal, like
yeah.
floating skylines and stuff like that. But
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
really talented filmmakers know how to use effects when
exactly,
necessary, really, rather than
yeah. But it helps obviously that like the director of Akira, I'm going to get annoyed by how I say it, but
yeah,
the director of this film was also the artist for the manga, which is based on. So that obviously
yes, absolutely,
uh,
yeah, yeah,
ensures it has a strong sense of style.
yeah,
Um, the soundtrack as well, I wanted to mention,
yeah,
uh, was one of my. I really like that style. This is before everyone started doing like, not everyone, I think exaggeration, but like the idea of like just heavy drum beats and stuff like that, and
yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of ambience.
yeah,
But I think the best thing about the soundtrack is the fact that it's used very sparingly.
yeah,
A lot of the time, you're just left with like the sounds of the city and after certain cosmic events, you're just left with like wind and not much going on, and that's used very effectively.
yeah, yeah. The best soundtracks and scores like that I find are ones where you like you find
Mm.
you're noticing it at times because it's used to its full effect. If you just have like violin and piano for the whole film or something, it's probably just
Yeah,
you just kind of tune it out. But here
I
you
think
notice
yeah,
it works. Yeah,
I think if you watch films like Marvel films, not to knock on them or anything, because I do like them, but you could listen to the soundtrack of a Marvel film and think, oh, this sounds quite good, but like you don't really notice it when you're actually watching the film
no,
because they just kind of use it all the time
yeah,
to
yeah,
like punctuate everything. Whereas I feel like in something like Akira, they when they want to use it, they spare it. So
yeah,
like the thing that will always stick in my mind is the opening with the shot of just a huge crater in Tokyo, and there's like the banging drums and like tribal choir. It's like
yeah,
it's very punctuated and noticeable, uh, and it's noticeable because a lot of the film doesn't have that. It's just like I say, naturalistic sounds.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Oh yeah, I love that stuff. Uh, like the whole mix of the authentic, like original, instruments and like the sci-fi beats and stuff
Yeah,
works very well, I think.
yeah, yes, yeah, it does. It really does, and it's. I'd say it's kind of its time, but also timeless almost because like it's still
Yeah.
enjoyable. It's very 80s, but also like I can still enjoy it today.
Yeah, it is 80s, but it's like it's so unique that I
Mm.
think that's what makes it persist.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, that's the best. That's the best kind of stuff where you can pinpoint when it was
yeah,
made, but also
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Because when something when it's timeless, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be like this nebulous thing that doesn't use any influences. A good example of that is like all the there's quite a lot of like retrofuturism stuff in it.
Yeah,
Like the funniest thing to me is in the end when like the scientist is looking at all the computers and it's like printing off loads of stuff. I'm
yeah,
like, and
yeah,
he's like, oh my god, look at these results. It's like,
yeah.
would it not be on a screen?
Well, they that works in that sense. The people complain about that when it's like stuff that's meant to be prequels of like the Alien films are better
Mm,
for that. So like Prometheus, for example, is meant to be set like thousands of years before Alien, and yet the
yeah.
technology looks so much more advanced. Like
Yeah.
in
No,
Alien,
it's so true.
they're using like old computers. Yeah, they've got like
No,
these.
I'm not even complaining about it. I really like that
Yeah, yeah,
stuff.
no,
And
no, it works. It
especially,
works in there. Certainly, it's very like, and that's why Alien is infinitely better than Prometheus. Like, yeah,
oh, exactly. And that's what I mean. It's like when I say it's timeless, I think,
yeah,
that obviously makes it feel very 80s, but
yeah.
uh,
Well,
you still enjoy.
on
Yeah.
that note, I was going to say actually with about that we were looking about it on IMDb, and we saw
Mm.
as an upcoming project, there's allegedly a remake that could be
Mm.
it said in development on the IMDb page, directed by Taika Waititi uh,
Yeah.
of Thor Ragnarok and Jojo Rabbit fame. Uh,
Yeah.
now there's no more information about it on there as to whether it would be. I presume it would be a live action remake because I don't know why you just make another animated version. But
Yeah, I did a little bit of research and I looked
yeah,
and apparently uh not so originally like back in 2014 I think
mm,
there was rumors of a live action remake but like made in Japan
right, yeah,
like as a Japanese film but like it was just kind of in development hell for a while.
yeah,
So I guess at some point either either this is like a new project or that has like Taika Waititi's taken the reins of that. I have no idea.
it's possible it is one
Uh,
of those projects that's just in development because it would take some budget, like it would take
yeah,
some
yeah.
budget behind it to make it. But I'd be
Mm,
interested. Do you
I
think it would be? Do you think it'd be worth doing? Would you want to see that or like?
I mean, I'd be interested to see it, but I mean, I don't think it's worth making to begin with. Like, if it's made anyway, I'm not gonna like. I'm curious enough about it to go see it,
Yeah,
but I obviously don't think that it was necessary.
yeah, yeah. I don't think. I think it's one of those. It's not like a like a Lion King remake or something where I'm like annoyed
No.
that it exists or something. But like I
Yeah.
think it is possible, but equally like I wouldn't really think it's that necessary. Really, like,
No.
and I think
I think.
they're in a difficult place
Yeah.
as to whether like if they change the setting and put it in America instead, like you're basically making an entirely different film then, and you're making a film that people will complain about. Because I know like when they made the Ghost in the Shell like remake one, people complained about
Mm.
that not being Japanese, and I think is Death Note, is that like an
Oh
based
yeah, the Netflix one.
the Netflix one, and people like that's meant to be like I've not seen that, but I know that people complain about that with relation to that. But
Yeah, I think that's what I was getting at earlier. Like, there's just a very different like. Uh, uh, I'm gonna be really like abstract here, but it's just like a different feel when you watch like something Japanese,
yeah, yeah,
any foreign film, really. And there's a different sort of structure to it. A good example is like Death Note. The main character is basically a complete psychopath.
yeah,
Uh, and in the American remake, they made him to like a likable person. So
yeah,
I think America like there's just that tendency narratively to have this like the idea that the main character has to be sympathetic in some way or
Yeah,
relatable or whatever, or people won't like it. Uh, Whereas, like, in Japan, I mean, you can see that in Akira to an extent. Like, Canada is I suppose Canada is quite likable, but you could argue Tetsuo is sort of the main character as well, and he's not exactly very likable.
yeah.
Uh, he's a complete murderous psychopath. So, uh, yeah, I don't think it will be good, but I suppose I'm curious enough, especially with Taika Waititi. I'll go see that probably.
Well, I think yeah. He's a good director, so he could make something interesting out of it. But I do think basically once you start changing enough things about it, you're basically just using the general story and just transporting it somewhere.
Yeah.
Like you're not actually, and I guess you're really doing it because of the popularity of anime,
Mm.
in America and in the rest of the West, really. So like whether you're actually doing it because you have a vision for the project or whether it's just because it's popular, like, I don't know, but
My prediction is basically it's going to be like every other remake of this nature, where they'll just take the superficial elements that people remember.
mm,
Like, I'm sure they'll have, gross, wrinkly kids in there. I'm sure they'll have Tetsuo put on a red cape. I'm
yeah,
sure they'll have all that stuff in there that people think is what they remember, but really what makes the film special is sort of the tone and
yeah,
the
everything else.
talent behind it.
Oh, I was going to say with relation to the kids, actually, have you seen the film Minority Report?
I have.
Yeah, it very much influences that. Actually, I think
Yeah.
like the precogs, I think they're called, like the things that predict.
Yeah.
And I looked that up as well, and apparently that did influence that as well. Just the kind of
Mm.
the fact that they're kind of very childlike, but have this kind of like special
Mm.
ability to be able to psychic ability. But that just another
Mm.
influence that interested me.
Yeah, I love those as characters. Like, I love the idea that like uh, it's a great way to start off because it creates such a weird like feeling to begin with when you just see
Yeah,
this old wrinkly looking kid. It's like what
yeah,
the hell?
yeah,
Is he
yeah,
an old man? Is he a kid?
yeah, absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's grim. Let's
Yeah.
talk about the
And the
story a
voice
little
and the
bit.
voice acting there is good because like some kid acting. I mean, I know obviously I'm reading the subtitles and not like understanding the Japanese, but it's still like
Hmm.
child actors like that can sometimes be like not good. But in that one,
Yeah.
they convey that well from what obviously I know it's a bit difficult to tell when you're not reading the same thing. But
No, I think they did it well. I'm fairly sure it was like women doing it. That's normally how they do it.
yeah, yeah, it's
It
not.
might not be though.
Yeah, yeah,
No, I really like that. I really like that decision to I like the voice acting. Yeah, we should probably clarify we watched the Japanese version. I haven't seen the
yes,
English version, so I can't really comment
yes, yeah.
on it.
It wasn't a dub. It was a subtitle version. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Which
I can only say that like because it's so like meticulously animated, a dub in this instance probably isn't going to be very good because it's never going to sync up
no,
properly.
yeah. If I was in watching anything like this, I would rather. I mean, if I was watching any foreign film, I usually rather watch subtitled than a
Yeah.
dub. Like it's
At least at least on the first run through.
yeah,
Maybe on the second run through you could try the English, but like
yeah. Like I
uh,
wouldn't really want to go see Parasite with with a dub.
no.
You know,
No.
I wonder if they get the dub Parasite. That would be.
Oh goodness. Uh so the story I wanted to briefly mention, like
Yeah.
uh how do you feel about the story? Were you like did you think it was satisfying arc or whatever you'd call it? Do you think you got a full grasp of what was happening?
Yeah, I don't. There wasn't. I can't think of any major point where I was thinking like, what is going on here? Or
Mm,
anything. Like, I was able to enjoy the entire experience. Um,
mm,
there's once or twice maybe when I thought it was possibly like slightly too long. Like like
yeah.
sort of a couple of scenes that maybe weren't entirely necessary, but not to the extent of like
Mm,
it's like unwatchable or anything. Just to the extent
mm,
it's not like 10 out of 10. Like.
yeah.
But I was
Uh,
okay with that. What was your feeling on that?
no, I think I understood narratively what was going on. I do feel like a few things probably went over my dumb brain that I'd have to watch it again. like thematically, you know,
Yeah.
to sort of grasp what was going on. But again, I did a bit of research, and I haven't read the manga that it's based on,
Yeah.
but apparently uh, this film is essentially the beginning. So there's 6 volumes of the comic, and like this film is essentially the first half of the first volume and the last half of the last volume, and then just sort of a mix of stuff in between.
Right. Yeah.
So and you do kind of feel that in Act Two, which is probably the weakest part, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
because it feels like there's so many plot threads they try and establish. Like, I mean, it starts off like this uh, uh, sort of dystopian sci-fi future with some supernatural elements. Then it starts talking about like evolution and like a military coup and like
Yeah.
politics, and
Well,
it's like I think it gets a bit too much.
that was possibly where it gets a bit bogged down, where the old government guy sort of, when he's sort of putting stuff in his suitcase, uh,
Mm.
and then he shoots the other guy. Like a few of those characters just felt a bit like you haven't really spent that much time with them, so it's kind of a bit,
Yeah,
why is it important? Like I still quite enjoyed that stuff just because I enjoyed watching
yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's kind of a bit like I'm not exactly sure why I should care. Like at this point,
Yeah, again,
but
it
not
wasn't,
badly. Yeah,
yeah, it wasn't so much that it was like unclear what was happening, but it was just sort
yeah,
of like, it felt
why?
like you were just establishing stuff
Yeah,
and very quickly moving on or just forgetting about them.
yeah,
um, and another thing I wanted to mention, there's a lot of stuff that blows up and gets destroyed in this film.
yeah.
Uh, uh, do you think you got numbed to it, or do you think you were kind of it sort of established that tone of just awe and like destruction? And do you think it added to it, or do you think there was a point where you're just like, okay, I'm sick of seeing stuff blow up
Yeah,
now?
I think because of it was visually interesting, it was worth doing.
Mm.
Because as a comparison, in Man of Steel, Superman film, at the end of that, you're so numb to like when like he's fighting Zod at
Yeah,
the end, like it's literally just like buildings coming down, like stuff, and you just
yeah,
don't care, like you just brain switches off.
yeah.
I was still kept engaged regardless of the kind of the destruction because it was visually interesting to watch. Like if it had
Mm.
been the exact same shot of an explosion, like a Michael Bay film, like it wouldn't have been interesting. But because it's at least, it moves around. Like I like the bit when they're in the, I guess it's kind of spoilers because it's near the end, but when they're in the like Olympic Stadium and stuff, and like
Mm.
getting like massively like
Oh
inflated,
God, yeah, that's
and it's
cool.
just like it's just that stuff. And even like the bit where it's on the bridge, like I enjoyed that. Like
Yeah, yeah.
so I didn't
And
particularly enjoy that.
I think it's also necessary to an extent too to show how powerful he gets,
Yeah,
like to
yeah,
show that he can just destroy stuff. And I also think as well, it's same thing with the soundtrack where it's not constant. It's punctuated very cleverly, like between quiet character moments and like other stuff happening.
yeah,
Uh, it's not. It's towards the end, it's more obviously uh, constant, but to up until that point, you feel. And again, I feel like that sort of adds to the overall tone that it's going for, which is sort of bleak, but also it's quite telling that like everything gets destroyed. This is again spoilers, but like everything gets pretty much destroyed. Um, but at the end, it feels like a happy ending, really, because everyone, most of them survived, and like they look like they're off on their way to sort of rebuild, and like it's sort of optimistic in a way.
yeah,
Uh, and I feel like that's almost like quite a Japanese mentality. Like after obviously World War II, there's that sort of feeling of uh, you know, in American films, it's all about preventing the big disaster or preventing the big, apocalypse or whatever. But in this, it's almost like matter of fact. It's like, yeah,
yeah.
everything gets destroyed, but we can move on and we
Is it
can,
that accepting it and moving on? Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and that's certainly going to be in the mind of the people making it. And
yeah,
coming out in the 80s, there's still
mm,
whole nuclear threat as well, which is still still existent. They've seen it firsthand
oh
before, and
yeah,
it's still out there. So It's
Oh
certainly
yeah, I mean that's pretty obvious. Like just from the beginning, like
yeah.
uh, it's obviously World War supposedly happened after World War III, but
Mm.
the idea this everything being destroyed and like that was probably a real fear, like
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
very real.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so do you have any final thoughts or summing ups or whatever?
Well, only I would say I would recommend it, and I would recommend it even if you haven't seen uh, any like anime before, like me. Like
Mm,
I think that you would get a lot out of it if you are someone who enjoys animation or
mm,
like I do, or anything like that, or sci-fi, or something like that. And I know it is. I think you can still see it in cinemas, and I think some in
yeah,
some places, possibly not everywhere. I don't know, but
yeah.
if you do get the chance to see it in the cinema, I would recommend doing so in there.
Oh yeah, that's a very brief thing worth mentioning. We saw it in 4K,
Yeah,
which I suppose made a difference because it was such a big screen.
yeah,
However, I don't think you necessarily need to see it in 4K. But
no,
I think the main difference being at the cinema made was like the sound, like we
yeah,
said.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, yeah. That's kind of the experience. Like I would say with a lot of films, to be honest. Like if you could see it in the cinema,
Yeah.
do it there, but I know that's not always possible. But like,
No, yeah.
and
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think it's pretty deserving of its status as sort of a classic, as you will. Uh, I hope if you are an anime fan, as it were, and you haven't seen this, you should go see it because, like I say, feels very detached from what anime has become, in my opinion. Uh, and it's just overall it's just a really very enjoyable, very different, unique film.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't, I think I don't know whether I'd put it on my Letterboxd yet or not, but I think I'd give it like,
Oh yes, I need to do
I'd give it a 4 out of 5. I would say.
that.
I
Yeah.
think it's a,
Okay, we'll see.
uh,
Yeah, have we linked our letterboxd in at all at any point? Because we
uh,
should do that.
I'm not sure actually, but yeah, I will put it in the description there. You can check
Yeah.
out my check out my ratings on there and my various random lists of stuff.
Yeah. All
Cool.
right, cool.
Right. Well, thank you anyone for listening who's got this far. And to say, don't check out our letterbox, check out the other videos. And thanks for watching.
Thanks
Bye.
very much.